war and personal aggression. How do you define war?
How do I define war? Well, when I wrote the 33 Strategies of War, people were saying, well, maybe don't put the word war in the title because that's not really what it's about. People don't like war. Since I was a kid, I've been fascinated with warfare. I hate to say it, it's part of being maybe male, I don't know what, but I have photographs of me 4 years old with all kinds of army regalia and soldiers and everything. So I love the word war. It excites me. The history of it excites me. I can't tell you, reading about battles. But war isn't just about war with machine guns and tanks or swords and shields. It's about conflict. And Heraclitus, the great pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, said, war is the father of all. And so basically, war exists in nature, the struggle for survival. Anytime there's friction or conflict, where two people or two species or two animals are facing off, and one is going to win and the other is going to lose, losing either death or something bad happening, that is war. So for me, it's a metaphor. It's not just, our traditional idea of war. It's about any kind of conflict or friction. So I wanted that book to be about all the amazing strategies that have occurred throughout history, from Napoleon to Hannibal to Genghis Khan, and all the brilliant minds that have gone into it. Because, as I say in that book, so much of civilization and so much of our powers that we now take for granted now actually came out of warfare, out of the creativity and the energy that was generated through these conflicts. And I wanted to find a way to make it relevant to you in your daily life. So Napoleon was famous for his flanking maneuvers, for arresting your attention in the front with some frontal maneuver, and then sneaking in one of his armies to the side and attacking you from the side and destroying you because there's a devastating psychological effect from a flanking maneuver.
Right.
Well, what is the equivalent of a flanking maneuver when you're dealing with office politics, et cetera?
Right.
So war is a metaphor for all of the conflicts that we deal in life. And being human means if you haven't gone through your life by the time you're 30 without many different conflicts and battles and fights, then I don't know where you're living. You're in some hole somewhere, right? Because that's what it means to be human. So that's what war is to me.
Yeah, and you've taken an interest in all the things that are happening with the war in Ukraine, and you've made an excellent video analyzing the war in Ukraine through the lens of your book, The 33 Strategies of War. What are you noticing with Ukraine and Vladimir Putin and all of these things?
Well, war is something that's extremely dynamic, which also makes it a very brilliant metaphor for social life, et cetera. And what I mean by that, there was a great book, I can't remember if it's one of Edward Luttwak's books, but it's about how in warfare the dynamic is one side develops some great strategy, some great based on technology or some creative thing. The enemy now learns from that and develops a counter strategy, which is even more powerful. Then somebody learns from that counter strategy and creates a counter on a spiraling effect upward, okay? So there's never any kind of staticness in warfare, which is its brilliance, right? And so what fascinates me now is war is so technology-based, right, that it's almost kind of losing the human element to it. But one of the great conflicts in modern times was the Vietnam War, where an incredibly powerful military, the United States military, lost and was humiliated by an army that was basically using things from the 19th century or early 20th century. How could that happen? Well, because strategy outdid technology, that strategy is more important than technology in so many ways. Here we are in 2022, and people who are much wiser than I am about what's going on in warfare have written about this. But the whole idea of like tank warfare and heavy armory and that kind of thing is almost becoming obsolete because of the amazing anti-tank weaponry that has been developed that can pierce through any kind of metal, through anything, and basically neutralize it completely, right? So it's destroying a kind of a paradigm of warfare that has existed with Desert Storm, et cetera, what the Soviets had used. And then also new rockets that can actually hit ships at sea very long range, etc., and anti-aircraft weaponry, which has grown incredibly powerful, is neutralizing some of the most powerful pieces of technology. So how do you deal with that? And strategists are now trying to figure out, what the way around it or how to utilize that. Well, Putin is someone, as I talk about in that video, is someone who is obsessed with control, right? He hates chaos. He's a KGB, product of the KGB. He hates any kind of social chaos. The moment there's the glimmer of a revolution in Russia or other countries, he's deathly afraid of that. He's got to tamp it down to the point where he's going to stifle any voices of dissent, right? And he's controlled everybody in government to the point where they're like his puppets, right? He has his fingers on everything. One man over this immense country, and people got misquoted me. I'm not saying Russia is the biggest country on the planet. It's the largest country on the planet by size. One man over this immense area is insane, right? But this idea, this need for control, he uses now in warfare, because war is human. It's not like something that's not human. So his psychological need for control is going to now translate, is now going to be part of his approach to warfare. He wants to control it. How do you control it? Well, we saw in Chechnya, we see in Syria, the way you control it is brutality. You bomb the shit out of these places. You level cities. You destroy the population. You infiltrate. Once you destroy a city, you bring all these other quislings in there. You bring local people to take over the city. In Chechnya, there'll be Russians who are loyal to Putin, etc. You just devastate the shit out of it so that there's nothing left that could possibly rise up against him, right? Total control, okay? It worked in Chechnya. It worked in Syria. All right, I'm now going to apply it to Ukraine, right? He's kind of drunk on his own success. So he amasses this army that he's going to march into Kiev, and it's going to evaporate in a matter of days. And the other thing about him is he has no access to real-time information about what's going on, because everyone is so afraid of not telling him the truth. They give him this idea that the Ukrainians are actually going to welcome the Russians. He's using a 20th century form of warfare that Stalin used against the Nazis in World War II in the 21st century. And it had a terrible, terrible effect, at least in the initial weeks of the warfare, right? Because the Ukrainians, with their smartness, with their agility, with what we call maneuver warfare, trading mobility for firepower, because mobility is a force multiplier, and the Russians have no mobility at all, because it's a top-down army where the soldier on the field has no control. They're just a robot being told what to do by the field general, who at that time was in Moscow, etc. And so it was a classic lesson in all the dynamics of warfare and how you cannot fight the last battle, which is what Putin was doing, right? And so it showed to me all the weaknesses inherent in him, all the lessons that I've been trying to tout through the 33 strategies of war. And it brought back to mind the whole thing about Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, I'm glad you put the book up there, thank you.
You're welcome.
Napoleon, for better or worse, I think he's an amazing person to study, is perhaps the greatest strategic mind that ever existed. I call him the Mozart of warfare, right? And what happened with Napoleon was warfare had become very static under like Frederick the Great and the Prussians, right? Just marching in a giant army, incredibly disciplined. They were all like robots in these formations that would overpower the enemy. And he won battle after battle. And Napoleon goes, I'm going to fight a totally new way. I'm going to use what the French Revolution has given me, a citizen army of millions. I'm going to break them up into smaller divisions. I'm going to give them field commanders, field general, lieutenants, who are going to have control over the battle. They don't have to wait for me to tell them what to do. I'm going to give them a mission statement, right, to tell them what we're trying to accomplish. In real time, they can see what the enemy is doing and they can react, knowing my form of warfare. He's going to give up control. He's going to let other people decide. He's going to use chaos to his advantage. He's going to be a master of what's happening on the battlefield in real time. He's going to listen to what soldiers tell him. What a brilliant invention. And for 10 years, he was the supreme master of warfare.
Yeah.
And then what happens? The Germans, who were humiliated by him, the Prussians, a man named Carl von Clausewitz, who wrote one of the greatest books on warfare, is one of their leading strategists. He says, we're going to learn from Napoleon and we're going to use it for the German army and we're going to make it even better. Okay? Putin is now the Prussians. He's now Frederick the Great. And the Ukrainians, they're not of the level of Napoleon, but they're kind of using more of that Napoleonic form of warfare. And the pressure is always to go back to the past, to fight what you know, to try and use overwhelming force and technology to overpower an enemy, and it never works. An idea is stronger than all of the artillery in the world. Morale is more powerful than all of the artillery in the world. When you're motivated to fight, and you compare the morale of the average Ukrainian soldier with the average Russian soldier, it's like 20-1 there. The Russians are demoralized. They're paid poorly. They're fed poorly. They hate it. They don't know why they're there. The Ukrainians are fighting for their wives, their children, their families, their land. So it's got so many lessons. It's about what I wrote about that I'm absolutely fascinated by. But also, I have a personal element in that I was in Ukraine a couple of years ago. I have friends there. It's a wonderful country on the rise. The young people are fantastic. They're full of energy. They're very much into technology, and they're trying to create a new world there. To me, it was more exciting than anything going on in the United States. I was genuinely excited about their future. So to me, to feel the boot of Putin on them, stamping out their experiment, seems so depressing. Makes me so angry, so upset that I am trying to do whatever I can to help them. And I ask people to keep sending them money and to not lose interest in this very key battle.
Yes, and we'll put links in the description to those things that you've shared on your previous video about this as well.
Okay.
And Robert, I wonder, through the lens of your work and guerrilla warfare and things like that, what things do you see that the Ukrainians are doing or can be doing to overcome this larger enemy?
Well, I mean, at some point they were doing very brilliant things in the beginning. They knew that being dispersed was better than concentrating their forces. They knew that if they could draw the Russians into their cities, into their towns, they would have the advantage because they could fight in a form of guerrilla warfare. The Russians with their tanks would be completely neutralized, right? So they were doing all kinds of things absolutely brilliantly because the terrain around Kiev and that part of Ukraine allowed them to do that. Now they're in the east where the terrain is much more flat, where there's not as many places to hide, where the Russians don't have the advantage, but they can use their artillery to endless effect. And it's very difficult. So I would never blame the Ukrainians. They're doing an absolutely brilliant job. And what they did was, why I compared them to Napoleon was, after they dealt with the Russian, that really nasty, nefarious invasion of the Crimea, right? And the Russians are they're like devils. They're so devilishly clever and in kind of an evil way. They learned their lessons, the Ukrainians. We can't fight war. We can't fight on the same terms as the Russians. We have to create mobility, maneuver warfare. We have to create a system where the soldiers on the field can make their own decisions. They don't have to wait. They created the equivalent of the Auftragstaktik, the mission statement that von Clausewitz talks about, right? And so they decentralized their army, which was absolutely the most brilliant thing they could do. Decentralization of a military force is a very powerful tool. Unfortunately, we see terrorist groups using that to great effect. It's very powerful. You have nowhere to hit. You don't know what center to hit at. So they did all the right things, but now they're in this ugly attrition warfare type game, and it's very difficult. attrition warfare fights both ways. And attrition warfare basically means you're going to wear the other side down.
Yeah.
You're going to bomb them until they're exhausted. And you don't care how many lives you lose. You don't care how long it takes. You're just going to wear them down. It's the ugliest form of warfare. It's the least creative form of warfare. That's what the Russians are doing. And it looks like they're succeeding, although in war you never know. It can turn around in a dime.
Yeah.
And the moment all the great, all the pundits are saying, oh, Russia's winning or Ukraine's winning, 3 days later it flips. So you learn a little bit of humility when you follow war. These things can flip on a dime.
Yeah.
And the Russians are expending so much of their military power right now. So much artillery, so many tanks have been taken out, so many planes have been destroyed, so many soldiers have been killed. We don't know how many, but tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have been killed. Ukrainians, at least probably as many, maybe a little bit less, but they're also paying a heavy price. But you can't eventually there's going to be a terrible price to pay on the Russian side for all that they're expending, money-wise, economically, morale-wise. So it looks good right now for them, but we're not seeing, we don't have an X-ray into what's really going on to see underneath the surface, because war is tricky. At one point, somebody looks like they're winning, but there are weaknesses that are being shielded from our eyes for various reasons. And history and time reveals those weaknesses. We can't see what they are. We don't have a crystal ball. Nobody can predict exactly where this war will go. But if I had to put my money, I always put my money on the side with maneuverability that fights the Sun Tzu Napoleonic form of maneuver warfare.
Great. Well, Robert, thank you so much for sharing that and for taking your time to discuss the war in Ukraine with me. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching this episode with Robert Greene. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe.